Let's talk about the coming eviction nightmare. Many of you are already feeling it. I saw in the chat this morning, many of you saying, look, I've already been evicted. I was evicted on June 1st. As many states relaxed their pauses on evictions, Texas was one of the first states to say, go ahead. Texas Supreme Court said, we're done. Get back to evicting people. Other states like Oklahoma as well. So this is a reality. And I'm worried about this coming economic disaster, because most states hit that pause button, but those holds are now expiring in about the next few weeks for many states. So why does this really matter? The 1-2 punch could easily exacerbate the housing crisis for Americans. So imagine already we have an affordable housing crisis in this country, and there's been incredible demand to build new housing, to get people into homes, and we just don't have enough of them already. We need over 25 million affordable homes. And now we're going to go through a massive eviction crisis in our country. 1/5, let me pull up these numbers. 1/5 of adults polled in May said they had slight or no confidence that they'd be able to pay their rent or their mortgage that would be due in June. So that's coming from new census data out this morning. An Urban Institute analysis also found that nearly 25% of black renters deferred or did not pay their rent last month. That's compared with 14% of white renters. So 25% of blacks, 14% of whites couldn't pay their rent, deferred their payments. In Michigan, oh boy, there's a coming deluge. They're expecting 75,000 landlord-tenant filings in the next few weeks. Can you imagine? Those court systems are going to be overwhelmed with evictions. It's going to be a disaster. It really is. The big picture, the pandemic, for all of its massive, crushing of the economies worldwide, is adding new burdens on top of the existing housing problems, because there's a supply and affordability problem before. So many people were edged out of cities because of the prices were too high. And then they would move out of the cities and they couldn't find housing because there wasn't houses. So a lot of people in California ended up living under overpasses. You drive into San Francisco, there's people sleeping under overpasses. Tent cities have popped up. This is a disaster. So prior to the pandemic, our homeless shelter system in the United States was stretched to its brink as it is. Now it's going to be filled up. And imagine all of these people inside of homeless shelters on top of each other, not social distancing. Add a pandemic on top of that. So we have moratoriums in Texas that have already lapsed in places like Texas. Other states are set to expire in the coming days. Louisiana, Pennsylvania, New York State, and others have all announced extensions. Actually, Louisiana and Pennsylvania are expiring. There's no extension there. New York, though, has extended theirs. Yeah, so I haven't heard. I was waiting for an update from Pennsylvania. They did not extend their moratorium. So if you live in Pennsylvania or Louisiana, that you could be facing eviction. At the federal level, here's the problem, right? So at the federal level, the HEROES Act that's sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk right now that they haven't touched includes $100 billion for rental assistance to stop this from happening. But Mitch McConnell, again, going on vacation. I'm sorry, if I'm Mitch McConnell, I am canceling your July recess. If I'm in charge of the Senate, I'm canceling your vacation. Sorry, folks, we are in a national crisis. You don't get to go on vacation right now. It must be nice for you to go back to your massive mansion in Kentucky, while other people are losing their place of living, their place of employment. The HEROES Act has $100 billion to help with rental assistance. It also included $75 billion to help landlords who then wouldn't be able to pay their mortgages. Remember, this isn't just about the tenants, it's also about the landlords, because many of them are not wealthy at all. Many landlords have one property that maybe they inherited in their family, and they're renting out a portion of it to somebody, or a duplex that they own, etc. They're not millionaires. And maybe they have a mortgage on that property. Many of them do. So when the rent stops coming in and they can't afford to pay the mortgage, default, default, default. This is exactly what Fed Chair Jerome Powell was warning us about, was this insolvency of the American people. Because it's not just about businesses and reopening, it's also about places of where you're going to live. And if we get a massive defaults rolling through the commercial sector, running through the banking sector, it's going to be a disaster in the making. And the Fed can only do so much. They've been pumping as much money as they can to these banks so that they're keeping the lending up, right? Mortgages are flowing great. People are buying and selling houses right now, and that's been fine. Housing prices have remained stable, and in fact, some areas going up, thanks to the Fed, keeping that market stable. But now if people can't pay those mortgages, and people can't, and banks are not going to want to lend money, even if the Fed is pumping them full of cash. So remember, an eviction moratorium is not a rent freeze. It just means that overdue rent is still accumulating. So if you can't pay your rent, you have to pay all that back rent. They're not wiping rent away. It just meant that you couldn't evict someone. So if you weren't up on your rent, you weren't current on it, now's you're hitting that wall right now. So it is possible, and we're going to keep our eye on this, that mom and pop landlords will be able to negotiate with tenants to try to keep them in there for as long as they can. And look, the cost of evicting someone is expensive. It's expensive to go through that process. The same is true for commercial landlords. It's very expensive. We saw that the Gap stopped making rent payments, and the Simon Mall system is taking them to court. They owe like $47 million in back rent, and the Gap has basically said, we can't afford it. No one's coming to our stores. We can't afford it. We may have to close just hundreds of stores in order to meet that, pay that back. So there is the bottom line on all of this, and I'm really concerned about it, is the domino effect that could harm both tenants and property owners. Landlords need rental income, of course, to pay their taxes, their bills, their mortgages. Remember, property taxes help fuel our state and local governments. So if these landlords can't pay property taxes because they can't get the rent from their tenants, this is when the whole system collapses. And this is exactly what the Fed was warning us about. Municipalities, of course, need that tax income to pay police departments, fire departments, all of those services. They are fueled by property taxes. And schools. Let's not forget schools. San Francisco really made its moratorium permanent this week. Permanent moratorium on evictions. I don't know how that works. So that means that landlords there can never use missing rent for pandemic-related reasons as grounds for eviction, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. Now that, my friends, is crazy. I'm a real estate investor. That totally undermines the entire system. That is not capitalism. Okay, you're totally undermining the system with that. California, again, crazy, off of its rocker. You had Oakland, California, just a few weeks ago announcing that doing criminal background checks on tenants is now illegal. You cannot, if you're going to put a person in your property, do a criminal background check on a tenant. Why? They say it's to allow those people who have had a criminal record in the past, who have been in prison, give them a chance at a place to live when they return to society. Okay, I get that. But as a landlord, the liability falls on me as a landlord. If that person does something while living in the house that I own, it's a fact. So let's say I rent to a tenant and I don't know that this person has murdered someone before or has a history of selling drugs, and who knows, right? I'm not able to find that out. Now they're in a property that I own and someone gets killed, someone gets hurt on my property premise. What's going to happen? I get sued as the property owner. That's what happens. So this is just a field day for lawyers, So now what's going to happen? I couldn't do a criminal background check on that person and come to find out that this person is a criminal and does bad stuff. And now the liability is on me. So you can take things a little too far, California, which is why I would never invest there. So now, San Francisco, you're not allowed to have an eviction for any coronavirus related circumstance. I get that. I understand. But what does that mean now? That just means someone could live in perpetuity in your property? How does that work? So I've worked really hard. I renovated a property. I placed a tenant in that property. They're paying me a reasonable rent. They have a great roof over their heads. And now, because of coronavirus, they can't pay me anymore. And that means they could stay there forever? And not pay rent? And I have no grounds to evict that person? So I just basically say, okay, I guess I'm done with that house now. I spent $300,000 renovating that house. I'm done. What? California. Unbelievable. But anyway, we are facing this eviction nightmare across the country. Let me know in the chat how you're surviving. Let me know what you're going through right now. Share your story about this, what state you're in. Have you been able to talk to your landlord about getting some sort of extension so you're not having to deal with an eviction? If you can talk with them and let them know, like, hey, I know it's expensive to go through eviction court. Please work with me. Allow me to stay in the property. I'll get caught up on my payments. I'll figure something out. Maybe I could use a portion of my security deposit to pay this month's rent. Something. Work with them. Most landlords have a good heart, okay? But they also have to pay a mortgage, and they need to know so communication can help a lot of things right now. So you don't have to use the court system to answer and solve your problems. But I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment below. And thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me to have you here, helping you build personal and financial intelligence. That's what our channel is all about. So thank you so much for subscribing and being a part of this amazing community.